Honestly, I'm kinda surprised I hadn't had this idea sooner. Let's speculate on which Nen category each zodiac may be a part of. For the vast majority of them, I'll also come up with a hatsu that would be in line with their potential category, hunting query, interests, personality, etc. I'll also be separating them into 3 categories. The first will include those whose Nen categories have been explicitly confirmed, just to quickly get them out of the way. The second will cover the zodiacs whose abilities we've seen either fully or to some minor degree, but haven't received confirmation of their category proper. And the third will include those whose abilities we haven't seen and know next to nothing about. Let's first tackle the 2 newest additions to the Zodiacs, Leorio Paladinite and Kurapika Kurta, who've taken the mantle, but thankfully not the guise, of Boar and Rat, respectively. Leorio is an enhancement lean emitter. Since I've already covered Leorio's categorization and hatsu in the video analyzing the new info we got on emitters from Togashi's exhibition, I won't go into it much here. All I'll say is that Leorio's emitted punch is more of an ad hoc use of a hatsu that was primarily made to be used for medical purposes, specifically to detect and neutralize hard-to-reach clots and tumors. Though I'd definitely argue that Jin getting 4 cc's of knuckles to the face definitely had a therapeutic effect on everyone in that audience. Kurapika, on the other hand, is a specialist midpoint conjurer, the only confirmed specialist midpointer. It's to be expected since he can switch from conjurer to special kind of specialist on a whim. While you can take a look at the conjuration video for a bit more info on him, I'll also say here what I said there. I am not going into his abilities. He has way too many of them, and they can easily take up a whole video on their own. Alright, now let's move on to the second category of zodiacs. Those whose abilities we have some info on, but whose categories have not been revealed. If my stupid segue wasn't clear, we'll be tackling Mizai Stone Nana, codename Ox. Before we do though, and I promise not to do this for any other zodiac, but just imagine someone tells you, oh yeah, we got this big-time lawyer to represent you. He's one of the most reputable members of the world-renowned Hunter Association. If anyone can handle your case, it's him. And then, on your day in court, this Furkan reject strides into the courtroom, sits down, and when he's offered a cup of coffee, says, thank you. I'll add the milk myself. How exactly do you plan on doing that, Mizai? Also, and I need to emphasize, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong, that his codename, Ushi, can mean either ox or cow, but the Chinese zodiac explicitly uses the ox from what I understand, so his cow getup and milk-adding habits are entirely his own. With that said, not only has he explained it, but we've actually seen his ability, Cross Game, in action. Mizai has 3 cards with which he can restrict a person's actions. The blue card will admit a person to the courtroom, the yellow card will paralyze them in case they ignore his warning to, for example, refrain from committing any violent action against him, and the red card will dismiss them, which I'm assuming manually frees them before the time period during which they are restrained expires. Cross Game is obviously a direct reference to his occupation as a lawyer. I believe this to be a primarily manipulation-based ability that's also paired with either emission or conjuration. Manipulation is almost certainly being used since the grid doesn't seem to actually physically stop the 3 bozos from moving. As in, they should still be able to move about inside the limited confines of the cage where it's simply conjured or emitted, but instead they are entirely paralyzed, which is a hallmark of manipulation. Now, whether the grid is emitted or conjured, I can't say for sure, of course, but I'd like to say it's emitted. Let me make a quick case for that. Quick in my terms. First of all, Linson, a hunter and Anstrade bodyguard introduced all the way back during the York New Arc, who I had no idea was ever even named, couldn't see the grid before using Gyo. Since those awakened to Nen are able to see emitted aura as a baseline, this means that In was being used to conceal it. We already know that In can be used to conceal Nen that is being transmuted, since that's what Hisoka did to mess with Castro. And we also know that it can be used on conjured objects, since Kurapika used it to conceal his chains to then sneakily BDSM Uvogin with. Since unlike transmutation and conjuration, emission emits pure aura, there's no reason to think why it couldn't be hidden by In. If you've noticed that this tells us nothing whether conjuration or emission is being used, you're entirely correct. I just wanted to establish that emitted Nen can be Ind. since I think this is the first time we would have seen in being used an emitted aura. Second, manipulation is closer to emission than conjuration, and since the grid itself isn't forming the cage that's restricting movement, it would make the ability more efficient were it emitted instead of conjured. Third, you need emission to separate your aura from your body in any capacity. So again, for efficiency's sake, it would make sense for the grid to be an emitted construct. Fourth, it just looks more like a laser-like grid, which most likely indicates that it's made up of pure aura, which puts it in the domain of emission. Of course, since this is a black and white manga, it's difficult to tell, so that's why this is my last and weakest point. Whether the grid is conjured or emitted, though, I have to say that I have no idea what the purpose of it is. If the paralysis is already accomplished via manipulation, and I believe that to be pretty much certain, I can't really say what the purpose of the grids would be. Maybe they can actually be avoided upon manifesting as a kind of condition, since Mise seems to be required to show them the 3 cards first and even warn his opponents, which could prompt an experienced Nen user to use Gyo immediately, thus giving them the chance to avoid the grid should they choose to go against his warning. Though that would perhaps maybe make it a bit weak for a manipulator's ability, since they seem to have the most leeway in terms of conditions. It could also be that there's a restriction wherein the grids can't overlap with each other, or any other among a dozen other possibilities which I could continue guessing at until the cows come home. So let's stop here. Based on cross game, I believe Mizai to be a manipulator, either pure or emission lean. Sticking with potential manipulators, let's do a quick one to change up the pace and stop you from clucking off the video if you already haven't. Cluck, codenamed Chicken, has showcased the ability to control pigeons. God damn it. Which he used to send out messages to every active hunter during the chairman election arc. We've actually already seen a very similar ability used in pretty much the same way by Ponzu, wherein she sent out her bees to deliver messages to powerful nearby hunters. Now, what Cluck did was obviously on a much grander scale, since there are more than 600 active hunters, a bunch of which would have been active in remote parts of the world. Nonetheless, the cores of the two abilities are borderline identical, and since Ponzu was designated as an emission lean manipulator, we can assume that Cluck would have a very similar classification based on this ability. Next, let's tackle Sayu, codename Monkey. If his journey to the west, Monkey King San Wukong reference wasn't already obvious enough based on design alone, he also has a conjured extendable staff as a primary weapon. We know it's conjured since it's able to change in length, which is for the most part a unique property of conjured objects. His primary battle hatsu is 3 monkeys, a direct reference to the 3 wise monkeys of Japan. See, hear, and speak no evil. They can be manipulated to attack someone, with each monkey having the ability to take away an opponent's sense, as you may have guessed, that of sight, hearing, and speech. Now, while the monkeys could be either emitted or conjured, conjuration seems more likely for 3 reasons. 1. The staff itself is conjuration-based, so it makes sense for the 3 monkeys to be as well. Emission is opposite to conjuration after all, and it's good practice for Nen users to avoid utilizing abilities based in categories directly opposite their own. Looking at you, Knuckle. 2. The vast majority of Nen beasts are conjured and not emitted. While emission can be used to make Nen beasts, it would seem that conjurers more often opt for this kind of ability type than emitters do. 3. This kind of effect, i.e. taking away of someone's senses, doesn't really neatly fit into any category apart from specialization, and traditionally these kinds of unique effects have mostly been tied to manipulation and conjuration, those being the 2 categories adjacent to specialization. Togashi has very much been expanding on the limits of the 5 regular categories though, for better or worse, so this particular point isn't as strong as it would have been 5 or 6 years ago, hence why it's last. With that said, I'd put Sayu to be a pure conjurer. The final Zodiac whose ability we know something about is Gel, codename Snake. I believe Gel to be a transmuter. She has thus far only showcased the ability to seemingly transform her hand into a snake. She's the only Zodiac whose codename, hunting query, and qualifications all align almost perfectly. Her codename is Snake, she's a poison hunter, and she's a coroner and pharmacist by trade. With that said, there are 2 reasons which make me think she's a transmuter. First, considering just how unifying her gimmick is, I'd be really surprised if the little snake hand thingy ended up breathing fire. Don't get me wrong, it'd be great misdirection considering she's probably pretty famous and you'd have to be a dunce not to expect a venom or poison related attack from the snake looking poison hunting pharmacist. Despite this evident flaw, I am fully expecting the snake-looking poison-hunting pharmacist to have a transmutation-based venomous attack. Specifically, one that's injected by the snake hand thingy. Now, as I mentioned before, transmuters are not immune to the effects and substances their aura mimics, but if anyone would be able to build up an immunity and properly use it in combat, it'd be either a Zodiac or a Zoldyck. My second reason for thinking she's a transmuter is that the level of body transfiguration required to turn one's arm into a flexible and stretchable snake-like thingy would entail, no pun intended, an advanced application of transmutation wherein what changes in shape and quality is not one's aura, but one's body instead. Unless you're Zoldyck and were introduced before Nen was properly conceptualized as a power system, but I'm not getting into that again. As such, Gale being a pure transmuter makes the most sense to me. Now let's move on to the final and largest category, which includes those Zodiacs whose abilities we neither know any specifics about, nor have actually seen. I'm going to be honest up front, while for most of these I think I have good ideas about what their categories could be, for some of them I got basically nothing and will be doing borderline baseless speculating. Same applies to their potential abilities, though I'm of course not expecting to be anywhere as precise as with categories, which of course makes sense. There are 6 categories, while there are effectively infinite potential ability variants. Let's start this category off with one of the most elusive of deadbeat dads, Jing Freaks, previously codenamed Boar. I actually have a whole video dedicated to looking into Jing's potential Nen type, but it's a bit on the older side and that put it in the just barely watchable category, so if you'd like some additional elaboration on this, do feel free to check it out, but I will be going over its main points here. Oh, by the way, if you're the type that likes to listen to videos as you drift off to dreamland, or are a fan of accidental ASMR type of content, I highly recommend the first 10 or so videos on the channel. They'll put your butt right to sleep. Back on topic, I believe Jing to be an enhancer, due to the following reasons. 1. Gon is an enhancer, and the Zoldicks heavily implied that the genetics play a role in Nen typology. While environment definitely does as well, both Jing and Gon grew up in essentially the same circumstances on Whale Island, left it at the same age, and have been remarked as being quite similar to one another. 2. Gon may actually be a full-on clone of Jing, which could have been made possible via the pregnancy stone on Greed Island. This could be why Jing seemed reluctant to talk about Gon's mom on the recorder. 3. Jing has shown he was able to copy and even perhaps improve on Leoryu's hatsu. This is not via a hatsu of his own, but simply a talent he has owing to his mastery of Nen, which allows him to copy most simple strike-type hatsus he's seen. Since practically all such abilities would need to be emission, enhancement, or transmutation based, think Gon's Junkin and its rock, paper, and scissor variants, it makes sense that he'd need to be in close proximity of all 3 of those categories. Logically then, placing him in the enhancement category seems to make the most sense. Now, I initially thought that he either had a surprisingly simple yet versatile hatsu akin to Gon's own, or an overtly complicated ability that required quite a few extremely specific conditions to be fulfilled in order to be properly used. After thinking on it over the years, I've decided on something in the middle. See, there's no need for him to have a simple strike-type hatsu himself, since he can just kind of make stuff up as he goes along, using the abilities he's already seen and tailoring them to his specific needs. Considering he has the propensity to form groups of people, insert himself as the leader, and then put them to accomplishing a specific task, it's possible that he has an enhancement-based hatsu that requires of a defined group of people to acknowledge him as their leader. No manipulation would be used to make this happen, of course. Then everyone in the group would see a great boost in Nen and physical traits. This would then be a support-type hatsu and would have come about through Jing's respect for his comrades and a desire for them to collectively succeed in whatever endeavor they're engaged in, be it completing an archaeological dig, creating an IRL video game, or venturing through the unknowns of the Dark Continent. While I would prefer something akin to this, his undeniable power of personality and ability to bring people together, which are hallmarks of a specialist, could mean he is indeed a baseline specialist or has undergone a natural Nen-type shift to become one. While it was mentioned conjurers and manipulators are most likely to undergo such a change, it seems like it's not impossible for other categories as well, just extremely unlikely. Then again, Netero had a whole group of elite Nen users who were so cultish about their reverence for him that most of them altered their appearances to better represent their assigned codenames. And Netero was an enhancer, so it's not really a rule or anything. And I personally wouldn't prefer it if Jing was a specialist. Seems a bit too expected. Better up, I believe Kanzai, codenamed Tiger, to be an emitter. I mean, just look at this face and tell me the dude's not either an enhancer or emitter. You can't. Need I say more? I mean, I will, probably more than I should. I just feel everything else will be supplementary to this point. Yay for physiognomy. So, Kanzai is a Zodiac, a group of elite NAN users valued enough to be handpicked by Netero to be a part of what is effectively the primary governing body of the Hunter Association. This includes things such as deciding policy, debating issues, managing both inside and outside political influences, among, I'm sure, quite a few additional duties. The Zodiacs also fill the role of Netero's training partners, and I'm confident that Kanzai's ability to throw hands is more than 80% of the reason he's on the council in the first place. It's not the issue that the dude's not the sharpest tool in the shed. The issue is that when it comes to things requiring competency above an 8th grade reading level, Kanzai is a rusty butter knife trying to cut ceramite. What I'm trying to get at is that I really don't think Kanzai is the type of guy that would have gotten to the top of the Hunter hierarchy had he relied on his unparalleled tactical acumen and cold logic. Don't get me wrong, he almost certainly has a very high battle IQ, but he definitely strikes me more as an Uvo type of fighter. You know, the type that would kick ass first and then use Gyo when it's too little, too late. This is all to make the very long-winded point that simple, strike-type abilities, as Jing put it, seem to be the best fit for Kanzai's, sensibilities. The two categories best fit for those kind of abilities are enhancement and emission, of course. The reason I'm leaning towards emission is his design. Kanzai wears a baseball jersey, and I think he may have a very similar gimmick to Razor, but with baseball instead of volleyball. My idea is that he emits a NEN ball, again like Razor does, but baseball regulation sized, and then chucks it at people. He can have varied pitches like curveballs, fastballs, forkballs, and other kinds of balls I had to Google since baseball is a faraway concept and not an actual sport here in Serbia. I also had the idea of him being a batter instead of a pitcher, which would require of him to conjure a baseball bat since he's never seen carrying a physical one with him, even on guard duty, but him tossing the baseball into the air and then batting it seems to go against the baseball gimmick since I'm like 50% sure they don't do that in baseball. Maybe in some other bat-related sport I'm not familiar with, but I'm not familiar with it, so you know. Also his temper is a perfect fit for how Hisoka generalizes emitters, for whatever that's worth. In any case, I think emission would fit what little we know about Kanzai as of now rather well. Next up, let's tackle Sacho, codename Horse. Sacho is one of the few characters we see actively carrying a supposedly physical sword. This immediately points us to the emission enhancement transmutation side of the diagram, since in order to be used effectively in combat, it's best for a sword wielder to either be an enhancer or adjacent to it. This is further reinforced through the fact that the other two characters we actively see carrying and wielding swords are Phantom Troops Nobunaga and Phaeton. Nobunaga is a transmutation lean enhancer, while Phaeton is a pure transmuter. With that said, there are two things that sort of threw me off. First is that Sacho is a handyman and detective by trade. While him being a detective could simply be entirely related to his general skill set and not his nen, there's a decent amount of correlation between the Zodiac's professional inclinations and nen abilities, and I initially didn't think that an enhancement or transmutation-based hatsu would be the most optimal in creating an ability able to aid him in his detective work. Second, despite seemingly being a swordsman, he isn't a part of the defense team, but the intelligence team, with regards to the Dark Continent expedition, which again points us to a skill set and potentially even a hatsu more suited for information gathering of some sort. As such, I began to lean towards him being an emitter, but then overthought it even more and went back to him being an enhancer because I thought up of an enhancement-based ability that could work well with both his swordsmanship and detective work. One potential ability that would fit the bill is the hatsu to greatly enhance his sense of perception, acuity, precision, speed, and strength. Does this sound like something most NEN users have or do as a baseline? Yes it does. But Wing said it himself that a lot of enhancers don't really need super special hatsu, but often rely on an empowered application of the baseline principles of NEN. This kind of generic ability would not only serve to greatly improve his swordsmanship, by allowing him to potentially predict his opponent's movements, notice hidden adversaries, determine weaknesses in their defenses, and so on, but also allow him to sniff out subtle odors, notice minute pieces of material evidence, and determine the presence of potential toxins or other relevant substances or chemicals through to smell or taste. As mentioned in the video covering the new info we got on enhancers, enhancement may be used to boost something as abstract as a skill, with Komugi consistently having boosted her skill in Gungi. If he were an enhancer with the ability I just mentioned, he could, through enhancement, also literally improve the abstract skill set required for both swordsmanship and detective work. Let's now move on to the absolute behemoth of a man that is Ginta, codename Ram. Out of all the Zodiacs Hisoka had the chance to measure up, Ginta was rated the highest, at 90, placing him between Kanzai's 85 and Illumi's 95 rating. This tells us nothing too specific though, apart from the fact that he's an absolute beast. Speaking of beasts, Ginta is a poacher hunter, and was assigned to the flora and fauna team of the Dark Continent expedition. I believe that, while this definitely speaks to his expertise in handling wildlife, it speaks vastly more about his fighting prowess, even among the Zodiacs that had not been assessed by Hisoka. The flora and fauna team can be expected to be faced with some of the greatest threats while on the Dark Continent, considering all the Chimera Ant level and above horrors that lurk there. And apart from his wildlife expertise, I believe that Ginta was assigned on the team as the bulwark should the defense team be indisposed and unable to assist the flora and fauna team. With all that said, what is Ginta's Nan category? I've no idea. I'll always say a character is a specialist only if I have very good reason to, so that's out of the question here. I don't think he's a manipulator, since most manipulators use physical and on rare occasion conjured objects to facilitate their abilities. Apart from his headphones, which seem to be primarily an aesthetic thing, he doesn't really have anything that could serve as a manipulation ability anchor. Finally, I don't think he's a transmuter on pure intuition. Seems a bit too honest for that. This leaves us with enhancement, emission, and conjuration. Any of these could fit, and his hatsu could entail anything from tracking poachers to fighting poachers. Probably both. I personally lean towards him being an emitter though. Firstly, because emission would be suitable for creating both tracking and combat-related abilities, such as perhaps marking someone hit by an attack so that Ginta would be aware if they ever again stepped foot in an area under his protection. Something like remote, always active, and barriers that only register marked individuals. Perhaps he could even teleport to the marked individual, flying Raijin style. Secondly, as much as I would prefer not to use it again, he is a good match for how Hisoka classifies emitters, i.e. easy to rile up. Ginta seemed to have taken Netero's death the hardest, and had the most visceral reactions to Parastan's inflammatory remarks. As such, I'll be tentatively placing him in the enhancement lean emitter spot, since that's what my gut tells me. Sticking with the theme of absolute units, let's now tackle Botobai Gigante, codename Dragon. Botobai is extremely tall and very old. During the election, he had been described as the closest to the former chairman in both age and ability among the Zodiacs. This should definitely be taken with a grain of salt though, since it was a slogan someone from the Hunter Association came up with to advertise his candidacy for chairman, and I don't think the candidates themselves had too much input into them, except for Parastan, of course. Nonetheless, the man's a monster, at the very least on the same level as Ginta, and is almost certainly near the very top of the Zodiac's combat prowess hierarchy. He's a 3-star terrorist hunter, so I think that's a given. Now, as far as his classification and ability are concerned, since he was assigned to the defense force and I have no additional info to go on, I will default to the upper half of the Nen diagram, i.e. emission, enhancement, and transmutation. Apart from being a terrorist hunter, he's also a public prosecutor and military analyst, so I'm very much getting the feeling that his abilities are primarily combat-oriented. As such, I think I'll play it safe and place him as a pure enhancer, much like Netero was. I'm imagining him as a bulldozer, capable of wreaking havoc on any paramilitary organization, a Goku versus the Red Ribbon Army style. He'd be the vanguard, the spear tip of an assault meant to strike whatever was ascertained as the enemy's underbelly and cripple their actions as quickly and efficiently as possible. I'm guessing that were things to have ended up differently and Netero hadn't been available at the time, Botobai would have set his sights on NGL's shadow government and then most likely continued to deal with the Chimera Ant threat. How that would have ended up is a different story though. With that said, there are numerous abilities that would fit this kind of character profile. If we continue with the enhancer route, I can see him having enhancement, transmutation, and emission-based abilities, though conjuration and manipulation being spliced in would neither be unheard of, nor a bad thing if not overemphasized. I'm imagining something similar to Kite's crazy slots, but without the randomness factor. He'd essentially be a Swiss Army knife of various offensive, defensive, and utility-based abilities, ready for anything from infiltration and stealth to high-octane firefighting and demolition. To emphasize his military analyst side, perhaps again similar to Kite, he can load a specific ability of his choosing, but can't use anything else until he uses it. This would not only serve to make that ability more powerful thanks to this condition, but would highlight his prowess in ascertaining a situation and coming up with the appropriate countermeasure based on the enemies, his allies', and his own skill sets and resources. Considering his size, I also had an idea for a symbiotic type mecha kind of ability, but I decided not to pursue it. As such, and as mentioned, I'll be placing Botobai in the pure enhancer category. As a contrast, let's move away from the mass monsters and consider Pion. Pion? Poyan? Pion? Pion. Codename Rabbit. She's a linguist, interpreter, and programmer, and a paleograph hunter, i.e. someone who seeks out ancient languages. While that is very interesting, and I can absolutely appreciate us linguists getting some representation, she's not even the only linguist in the story, I must admit that I'm pretty stumped with regards to her category, let alone her potential ability. Neither her interests nor hunting query really point us in a specific direction with regards to her nen. For what it's worth, I'll say that on pure intuition, I'd put my money on her being a transmuter. On the other hand, I also think it'd be pretty hilarious if she could bunny hop. She'd be doing the same thing Tsatsiki taught Gone and Kill One in Grid Island, but would also be able to propel herself while in mid-air to attack her opponent from various angles or bypass otherwise impassable obstacles. What Meruem did versus Netero, but without the pillars, essentially. This would entail pure emission though, so since I have nothing else to go on or any better ideas, I'll be placing her in the pure emission category after all. Continuing with the petite side of the Zodiacs, next let's look into Cheadle Yorkshire, codename Dog. Apart from being a Zodiac, of course, Cheadle is also a disease hunter, doctor, lawyer, and the current chairman of the Hunter Association. You know those jokes where the employers expect you to have 5 years experience for an entry-level position at 18 years of age? Well, I think we know who we can blame for that. If I had to guess, I'd personally put her as a conjurer. This is for two reasons, neither of which are good. First, I think she's almost a perfect match for Kurapika temper-wise. She's usually stoic and analytical, but is high-strung enough where she can easily get flustered if the right buttons are pushed, and Pariston has them on macro. Second, it intuitively makes sense to me, and the ability I've thought of for her would primarily rely on conjuration. Now, unlike with Gel, for whom I believe the ability to transmute venom would be rather apt, I honestly cannot see Cheadle actively conjuring diseases for combat purposes, primarily because I think it would amount to a rather horrific breach of her Hippocratic Oath, if that's even a thing in Hunter x Hunter. A few years back, I would have also said that conjurers could not actually create diseases since that would entail creating living beings, i.e. bacteria and arguably viruses. But then, this fabulous mother trucker came aboard and started turning guns into snakes that are also guns. Gun snakes. So, let's just say it'd be far less practical than making poison or venom. What I do see her doing is curing them, and doing so via conjuration-based hatsu, which would allow her to materialize various types of medical equipment, like syringes, scalpels, and defibrillators, along with various types of medicines. Through this ability, named Panacea, very original, I know, she'd be able to cure any disease she's familiar with, and may have a vaccine or cure already loaded for a select few of them. I think the ability would be similar to Leorio's, wherein its primary use would be medical, but that it could be used in various creative ways if push came to shove. If Cheadle did weaponize her expertise though, I think she'd actually be the scariest one to fight among the Zodiacs. Kacho will cut you down, Botobai will splatter you across the floor, Sayu will take away your senses, but only Cheadle is able to inject you with a polio-rona hybrid super plague. As said, I am putting her as a pure conjurer. Finally, I've left worst for last. Pariston Hill, previously codenamed Rat. We know basically nothing about this lovably insufferable bastard. As in, we know nothing about his hunting query, he's a triple-star hunter so it can't be a secret, profession, interests, or even ideals, apart from the fact that he has more screws loose than my grandpa's 50-year-old Lada. Among all the Zodiacs, if I had to place one of them in the specialist category, I think it would have to be Pariston. Despite the fact that most Zodiacs hate his guts, he he is charismatic and influential enough to consistently place first in the chairman election. It's also been said that he has a ton of sycophants and that his influence is all-pervasive. This kind of magnetism and charisma can be a soft indicator of a specialist. We do know that Jing considers him to be weak, and Periston even admits so, viewing himself as the weakest among the Zodiacs. Now, while all of this could be a ruse that even Jing was fooled by, I don't like to think that's the case and would prefer for Periston to indeed be the weakest of them, combat-wise. While the Zodiacs were stated to be Netero's sparring partners, it could be that Periston offered him a different kind of sparring match. One of schemes and influence, and not of fisticuffs. If we go with the notion that his hatsu isn't combat-based, an idea I've had regarding his ability for a long time now is that it would operate via a soliciting type manipulation-based mechanic, to then create an effect only possible through specialization. Soliciting type basically means that the victim's free will remains intact, but they're subtly conditioned to work in favor of the Nen user. The main advantage of such an ability type is that it can influence quite a large group of people while utilizing minimal resources. Considering Periston's high charisma, a slight push may be all that's needed to get someone to be his lackey. Furthermore, considering how many people he has under his thumb, a soliciting type hatsu seems to be the logical choice. He could simply be a baseline manipulator, of course, but I like to think that if he fulfills the condition of having a certain amount of people, under certain conditions, under his influence, that he may be able to produce some kind of effect unique to the specialist category. Similar to the 9th Prince Halkenberg's Guardian Spirit Beast, but specialization-based instead of enhancement emission-based. What that effect could be, I have absolutely no idea, but I can bet it would not be good for anyone apart from Periston himself, and would also serve as a good narrative contrast to Jing's own hypothetical hatsu. And that's the longest non-podcast video currently on the channel done. For anyone still watching, thank you very much. As I said, we have very little info on the majority of the Zodiacs, so I didn't want to waste time on baseless speculation for the few I really didn't have any half-decent ideas about. I went into as much detail as I could though, so maybe my ramblings may inspire a hopefully soon-to-be canon, but at the very least fun idea, in you. If you do get a decent idea for any potential abilities of any Zodiac, feel free to share it down below. Finally, for any who'd be interested in going the extra mile in supporting the channel, I've added YouTube memberships as an option. Please do not feel at all obliged to do so though, your viewership is already appreciated as is. On that note, once again, thank you very much for watching, feedback is always appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.